Alright, and then introduction to petroleum fuel facilities, pipelines, ground fueling facilities, J.P. Paul, Geyer, PERA. Alright, contents, intermittent and installation pipelines, ground products, fueling facilities. This publication is adapted from a unified facility guide criteria. United States government with the public domain have been authorized unlimited distribution and are not copyrighted. Alright, intermittent, intermittent installation pipelines. This discussion provides guidance for the design pipelines, either the intermittent pipelines with the cross-country connecting installation pipelines with the petroleum lubricated, petroleum oil lubricant facilities within installation. Primary difference in intermittent pipelines cross public and private property streets, highway, railroads, utility right-of-ways. Whether installation pipelines do not, intermittent pipelines may be the dedicated lines connecting two or more facilities, primarily privately owned common carrier lines serving several shippers. In some cases, shipping facilities may consult with a relatively short spur which delivers fuel to the suction side of pump station, which is part of the larger pipeline system. Pipeline receiving and dispensing facilities are normally part of bulk fuel storage. 1-2. General requirements. Do not start designing any fuel system without first complying with the familiar design requirements. 1-3. Design requirements. Fuel segregation. Clean product, diesel fuel, distillated type of the burner fuels may be shipped in the same product without segregation. Batches are usually product to product, but they may be separated by fresh or suitable treated water. Separating pipe systems are required for residual fuels. For many projects, provide the dedicated pipeline with the aviation turbine fuels. And then we got alright, then applicable regulations. Intermittent installation pipelines should be designed to describe below. Federal, state, local regulations are more restrictive than requirements indicated. More restrictive compliance shall apply. Installation pipelines. All installation pipelines should be designed in accordance with the ENSI ASME B31.3. U.S. Department of Transportation intermittent pipeline. U.S. Department of Transportation regulates the design, construction, operation of intermittent pipelines for liquid petroleum. Interstate intermittent pipelines shall be designed in accordance with the ENSI ASME B31.4. Interstate intermittent pipelines should be designed in accordance with the requirements of Title 49 CFR Part 195. Provided with a means of taking sample of the products shipped. Pipelines shall be small, smart, piggable, including long radius elbows, bare fittings, unless otherwise directed by the owner. So, provided surge suppressor with hydraulic shocks when required. Refer to appropriate reference information regarding piping and piping systems equipment. Equipping all pipelines, meters, basket trains provided with a capable installing proving meter 151 meters. Meters positive displacement. Use a flange connected cast steel body positive displacement meter of desired pressure with a flow rating to provide applicable service requirements. Ensure the meter has a drain and a register. Provide with the meter with a temperature compensation adjustable calibration where the custody of the transfer. Ensure meter accessories are compatible with either mechanical, electronic control, electronic support equipment selected. Consult with the owner and owner of the requirements for the meter to communicate remote locations. Where we go here? Alright, meters, turbine. Using flange connected steel body turbine meters, desired pressure, flow rating, meet applicable service requirements, provide with a flow straightener before turbine meters, provide strength, length of pipe, minimum of 10 pipe diameters upstream, 5 pipe diameters downstream of all turbine meters are as required by manufacturer. Ensure the meter has a case drain register. Provide 1 meter with a temperature compensation adjustable calibration 1. Whether the custody is transferred, ensure all operating supporting equipment of the meter is capable of the turbine meter selected. Resolve the owner requirements immediately to communicate with the remote location or the equipment to consider use of the card-operated or key-operated data acquisition system. Cards and their keys appropriate are coded with identified receiver of the fuel to allow access to the fuel. The quantities taken and transmitted with the data, receiving the data device, electric pulse transmitter mounted on each meter, each transition automatically recorded. Alright, manual valves, meters of construction. Requires valves with carbon steel bodies and bonds. Do not allow values in aluminum, gas iron, bronze material. Use API fire safe valves. Alright, your isolation valve types of the double block bleed isolation valves. UVC separation products over the tank or shell connections when the piping goes above or below ground between the pier and tank storage and other locations critical to pressure testing of the pipe. Plug valves, double block and bleed. Use lockable double-seated, tapered lifting plug type valves with automatic body bleed between the seats of double block and bleed. Critical applications or separation product services on each. Line shore-ended. When piping goes above and below the ground between the pier of the tank storage, other locations, critical pressure testing of the pipe. Valves should be designed for the synthetic seating material burned out in a fire, or a metal-to-metal seat will remain effective closure. Comply with the American Petroleum Institute Standard 607. Lubricated plug valves are not allowed. Include integral body cavity thermal relief valve. Ball valves, double block and bleed, double C with a trunnion-mounted lockable ball type valves, body bleed between the seats, double block and bleed. These will very rarely be used. Are acceptable alternatives to double block and bleed plug valves. The application of valves are operated very infrequently. An example of isolation valves mid piers that are closed perform pressure testing piping. Valves should be designed with a synthetic thinning material is burned out in a fire, metal to metal seat, remain to effect closure, and comply with the API standards 607, including the integral body cavity thermal relief. Or your gate valves. Use a double-seated, lockable gate type valve with the body bleed between the seats of the double block and bleed. They will very rarely be used because acceptable alternative to the double block and bleed plug valves and double block and bleed ball valves. The only other double block and bleed valves with not physically fit valves should be designed so that the synthetic seating materials burned out in a fire metal seat will remain in effect closure. Complying with the API standard 607, single-seated gates are not allowed, include integral body cavity thermal relief valve. Your quick opening, frequent opening isolation valves. Use these for less critical applications where double block and bleed shut-off valve is not required. Your ball valves, ball-type valves may be used with the valves quickly, frequently opening with the application for the double block and bleed valve is not required. Ball valves should be designed with a synthetic seating material burned out in a fire. Metal-to-metal seat will remain to effect closure. Comply with the API standard 607. The Teflon Viton synthetic seal seating material. Use full port ball valves with exact same diameter of the time of the pipe, 10 pipes diameter upstream and 5 pipe diameters downstream of the flow pressure control valve with the flow sensing device for the Ventures valves should comply with the API standard 608. Your butterfly valves are not allowed. Use full port valves exact diameter of the pipe if the line pigging is required. Alright, 1523, isolation valve operators. Provide manually operated valve with a specified with a remote automatic emergency operation geared operators with a ball with a double block bleed valve larger than 6 inches or 150 millimeter with a double block and the bleed gate valve, double block bleed valve specified with a remote automatic emergency servo that may have auto electric motor operators, suitable torque limiting controls if approved. Owner of the remote valve servo that uses a solar battery package to reduce the cost of the routing and the power of the motor. Operators provide the locking tabs on the isolating valves to allow padlock to be used to lock out valves during maintenance. Provide the chain operator's valve that's located within 72 inches or higher above the grade. 1524 isolation valve locations. Provide valve with the product piping system with the control valve with the permit, the isolation equipment with the maintenance repair, provide with additional valves with the required location necessary to conduct with the hydrostatic testing, provide manually operated valves expect with the motor operators are specifically authorized by applicable standard drawings, technical specification, double block and bleed type isolation valves for separation product services on tank shell connections. Above ground storage tanks over 12,000 gallons or 5,800 liters only, with the piping goes above the below the ground between the pier and the tank of the storage other location. Critical periodic pressure testing and piping quickening, opening frequent open type isolation valves may be used with less. Critical application for the double block and bleed shutoff valve is not required before adding isolation valves. Evaluate piping system and made modifications. Prevent pressure buildup caused by thermal expansion. Minimum requirement: provide isolation valves. Following location: provide double block and bleed isolation valves on each branch at the point of the connection for the main product pipeline or header. Provide double block bleed isolation valve on the product pipeline or header just before the leaves of the pump station. Provide double block and bleed isolation valve with an inlet outlet connection. Each line, strainer, filter, separator, meter, diaphragm, control valve, thermal relief valve, other equipment required with periodic servicing. One inlet, one outlet, double block and bleed valve may be used to isolate more than one piece of adjacent equipment with the connected series. Provide double block and bleed isolation valve upstream, downstream side with each of the line blind connections to the cross-country pipelines. Provide double block and bleed isolation valves on each main distribution pipelines immediately downstream branch connection with each of the existing future operating storage facilities served by the pipeline. Provide double block and bleed isolation valve intermediate position points of approximately 10 miles of the cross-country distribution pipelines to facilitate isolation section of the line of the maintenance and repair. G. Provide double block isolation valve on each side of the water crossing exceeding 100 feet in width near the shoreline of the submerged heat pipeline. Provide double block and bleed isolation valve with the critical points for the pipe cross for the under roadways, taxiways, roadways, for low point drains, high point valves. Isolation valve pits. Provide fiberglass and concrete pits with rolling or hinge covered isolation valves installed. Non-traffic area for the underground fuel system, design valve pits and valve operators so that the valves can be operated by personnel without confined space entry. Alright, 153, other valves except with the diaphragm control valve, the check valve, the U with the check valve to prevent the backflow with the hums, branch line, meters, location, run back, reverse flow must be avoided. Check with the valves maybe swing disc, global, dual plated hinge disc, spring loaded pop at the ball with the diaphragm actuated type. U with the check with the soft seat with the non-slamming type with the renewable seats and disc. Ensure check valve to conform with the American Petroleum Institute Spec 6D. Use the diaphragm non-surge check valve with the flow control feature with the discharge all the pumps. When using non-surge check valve, diaphragm control valve, non-pump discharge, consider the use of the spring-type water check valve before the diaphragm valve to prevent sudden flow reversal during the shutdown, passing back of the pump before the diaphragm control of the diaphragm chamber is filled and reacting by closing the valve. Oh, you did? Cool. 1532, thermal relief. Provide thermal relief valve to run shut off and check valve to relieve the excessive pressure caused by the thermal expansion liquid trap between the shut off points, figure 1, 2, 3, and 4. 154, diaphragm control valve. The hydraulically operated single-seated with a globe type with the diaphragm actuated control valves, usually extensively fuel system control valve. These valves consider the mainline valve with the pilot control system. Valve is operated varying amount with the pressure above the diaphragm, sent for the chamber above the diaphragm, exposed with the greater area of the diaphragm to the chamber pressure than the area of the disc exposed to the line pressure. Equal pressure for the chamber of the pipeline result with the greater force being applied to the top of the disc. This force disc against its seat, then it's closing the valve. By selecting proper pilot control system, these valves can be used in numerous ways for the control of the flow of the pressure level of the fuel system. Extreme care when including these valves, pipelines are significantly contribute with a surge potential and closing time to the short. When properly adjusted, they can reduce surges. That's your diaphragm control valves. Alright, 1541, opening and closing operation. The most basic operation, hydraulically operated diaphragm control valve. The operation is accomplished by applying pressure above the diaphragm to close the valve, relieve the pressure to allow the line of pressure to open the valve with the pilot trim with the perform the operation three-way valve with which can be controlled by a solenoid hand pressure differential or a float. 1542 throttle operating. This is the main. This is the other main method of controlling hydraulically operated diaphragm control valve. In this case, the valve modulates any of the degree opening of the response chain with the throttle control. Throttle control reacts with the pressure differential across the main valve with the pressure for the differential across the orifice plate with the regulate with the position of the disc and the main valve provide with the full portion of the manual installation valve which are placed in these as limits. 1543 check valve function. The unique function of the control valve is this main case for the main valve outlet pressure is connected with the diaphragm control. Therefore, if the downstream outlet pressure exceeds the inlet pressure which normally holds the valve open, the valve will close and prevent backflow. 1544 remote operations. Hydraulically operated diaphragm control valves can be operated remotely, accomplished by installing tubing for the point of the pressure sensing to the valve with using a remote controlled solenoids above with the trim. 1545 materials of construction. Stainless steel pilots and stainless steel tubing either the body and bond and skip cover made of stainless steel internally plated with the chromes and internally plated nickel monodular iron. Provide Viton Buna and diaphragm disc string includes electrical apparatus according to classification they are, in which they are installed provides means of wire seal adjustable pilots do not use aluminum valves. 1546 application for the pipelines if the hydraulically operated diaphragm control valves following application rate of flow with control pressure reduction, pressure relief, excess flow shutdown. 1547 the combination of these controls are possible. The 155 strain with the wire with the strain and protect with the central finger pump unless they preclude with meeting with the net positive suction head pump with the pump weather with the non-strain with the install with the suction set. With the central finger pumps installed with the spool piece with the temporary with the strainer with the be installed with the starting up with the system. Strainers are required on the suction side with all the pumps in me with the recipient refilterization. Strainers are not required upstream to issue the filter separated on the diaphragm controls. Also, use flange strainers controlled with the shield and fitted with the remove of the baskets on fine model metal stainless steel mesh with large mesh reinforcements. Unless otherwise specified, provide a fine screen mesh as follows. In all cases, ensure the effective screen area with not less than 3 times the cross-sectional area of the pipe of the truss upstream of the pump that shall be quickened and opening with a single screw type of the drain connection at the bottom. Provide pressure gauges on both sides of the strain with a differential type gauge across the strainer. Then ensure that the pump section meshes and size opening. Pump central figures mesh 7 at 108 thousandths of an inch. Pump section positive displacement meshes 40 at 16 thousandths of an inch. Receipt filterization meshes at 40 at 16 thousandths of an inch. Meter inlet unless downstream of the filter separator is the mesh of 40 at 16 thousandths of an inch. Part 156, surge suppressors. Every effort should be made with the control of the hydraulic surge with the shock with acceptable limits for the design of the piping system rather than use the surge suppressor that is not possible to become excessive, extremely impractical surge suppressor that may be incorporated diaphragm bladder type of equipment, top mounted liquefied pressure gauge with the wafer style check valve with the bottom of the drain above the check valve with the isolation valve with the provide with the knee valve with the round, the check valve with the permitted with the control of the bleed back with the surge suppressor without rebounding the load. Okay, the surge suppressor is possible the deployment with the shock with the cause of the shock. Surge suppressor can reduce shock pressure but will not eliminate it entirely. The preferred solution of hydraulic shock is conservative piping design using a loops and slow closing valve. Surge suppressors are strictly the last resort solution and require approval of the owner buyer designing its system. Alright, 157. Pigging equipment. Equipment at all pipelines without outlines, all the connection from the pig launch should receive the design outlets accommodate internal non-destructive inspection train with a provide sufficient curvature of bends in the pipeline to permit free passage of such equipment to provide with the T's factory installed with internal guide bars and all branch connections. 158. Pumps and multiple pump stations required to keep the pipeline pressure within the safe limit to provide with the appropriate location. 159. Sample contents. Provide sample connections. Provide connection with a sample of fuels, each for the section of the fuel transferring pipeline. Install the sampling testing connection after the receiving the point of the tank outlets in the outlet side of the filter separated fuel dispensing pump between the isolation valve with the remaining fuel, and each portion of the fuel transfer pipeline can be sampled whenever the possible. Install sample connection vertical runs. Provide quarter-inch diameter sample the point with the probe and the ball valve with quickly disconnection with the dust cap. 1510 special conservation aviation turbine special conservation inbound filterization aviation turbine fuel supply. Alright, 1-6, product recovery system. Provide with a product recovery system to collect and store usable aviation turbine fuel with the otherwise become waste from operational maintenance activity conserve the product recovery system other than products. 1-7, canopies. 1-7-1, canopies of the protected fixed asset with extreme weather conditions, unless otherwise directed with the owner provide with the canopy to protect the fixed facility asset with the operative with equipment extreme weather conditions, reoccurring sustained like extreme icing and snowing desert-like conditions, fixed facility with equipment that include but not limited to pump pad, filterization pad, meter pad, isolation valve pad, tank of the truck, the tank car, offloading, loading equipment pad, control panels, electrical panel, motor control centers. 172. The canopy to reduce the storm weather to provide a canopy to preclude the rain with reaching the contaminating area unless it requires federal, state, and local regulations, or is economically justified by reducing the size of the concrete remote spill containment or spill treatment system if directed by the owner of the canopy over the tanker truck with the tanker car with the loading and unloading in the contaminated area. Ensure all underside over the canopy is high enough to provide operative with a headroom when walking on the top of the truck or the tank car. 1-8, special calculation. Calculation pipeline filling and dividing the time with the drain stripping time, the larger and longer of the pipeline with the greater volume of the fuel required to fill the line, therefore the greater volume of the air to be required with the venting of the underside of the vent lines will delaying filling the lines delay change over the product with the multi-product lines as vent lines are allowing the filling of the line with not more than 4 times the design transmit time of the line. With the applicable connection venting line with the system drain line to avoid the spill of the environment, particular vent line over the velocity, which must not exceed the allowable air velocity to avoid electrostatic buildup in accordance with the API, American Petroleum Institute stated recommended practice 2003. Vent rate must not be less than low allowable pumping rate from ship to shore. Vent rate must be less than the design transmit velocity to minimum hydraulic shock. Alright, 2, ground products and fueling facilities. Introduction. The discussion provided for the guidance for the design ground product with the gasoline diesel fueling facility, cover the vehicle with the move with the fuel filling station, tactical refueler, truck loading facility, private the vehicle with the filling station, such as exchange service stations are not included. 2-1-1, type of the facility. There are 3 types of filling stations may be required in see figures 5, 6, and 7. Filling stations dispense of motor fuel, gasoline, and diesel into the government commercial type sedans, vans, and small trucks. See figure 5. Filling station for the dispensing moving motor fuel, gasoline, diesel into vehicles. See figures 5 and 6. Truck loading facility with loading gasoline and diesel with a refueler vehicle. See figures 6 and 7. 2. General requirements. Do not start with the design and fuel system without first becoming completely familiar with the design requirement. 2-3. Design requirement. 2-3-1. Fuel segregation provides separating receiver the storage and the distribution system, each with a grade with the type of the fuel with the otherwise approved owner, preventing misfueling, transfer of type of the other with the type of intent with the U with the different size pipe with the valve with the adapter for the nozzles, etc. Using color coded in accordance with the API recommended practice 1637 outside the U.S. the host nation standard of the different API recommended practice 1637. Use American Petroleum Institute recommended 1637. There's no other standards in effect. Alright, 232, faculty size. And each filling station provide one of the commercial type of dispensing for the display with the volume only with 100 vehicles assigned with the activity. The total amount of the storage capacity in each station should be approximately twice the capacity of all the vehicle fuel tanks by grade and fuel assigned to the activity. Minimum storage capacity any of the grade of the type of the fuel is 5,000 gallons unless approved by the owner. 233, facilities configuration. General with the control and safety separated with 3 type of the filling station for relatively small installation, one of which is limited amount of activity expected at one time and practical not to provide with a separate facility with in those cases separate functions as possible. Minimize maximum mixing traffic with the commercial type vehicle with the tactical vehicles. More with important maximum tactical refuelers being loaded with a relatively large quantity of the fuel. Other vehicles being fueled with their own engine motive fuel with the filling station with the must be configured to comply with the National Fire Protection Association 30A. Sitting in storage requirements. 234, shelters for staff facilities provide a shelter for the personal records and tools. 235, concrete fueling area filling station. Create a fueling area constructed with the concrete surrounding fueling islands with the concrete slab graded at a minimum 1% away from the islands. 236, concrete fueling area refueler truck loading facility. Provide concrete spill contaminating area with a concrete remote spill contaminant system. 237, canopies. 2371, canopies to protect fixed assets. Provide a canopy before protection for elements of fixed facilities as sets equipment directed by the owner for all pumps, meters, drain filters, control panels, electrical panels, motor control centers. 2372 canopy to reduce stormwater refueler truck loading facility. Do not provide with the canopy to preclude the braining of the reaching of the contaminating an area less required with the federal, state, local regulation economically justified with reducing size of the concrete remote spill contamination spill treatment system directed by the owner. Ensure the underside of the canopy is high enough to provide operated with a headroom with the walking on the top of the truck. 2373 canopy to reduce stormwater. The filling station do not provide with the canopy preclude with the draining of the reaching of the concrete fueling areas unless required with the federal, state, local regulation concrete remote spill contaminant treatment system required federal, state, local regulation economically justified reducing size of the remote spill contaminant spill treatment system or if directed by owner. 238 that regulation design must comply with the National Fire Protection Association 30 and 38 and American Petroleum Recommendation 615. 239 bottom loading. Bottom loading of the refuelers required with the refuelers are equipped. However, all the refuelers are not equipped with the bottom loading, which in the inventory of several years. Therefore, consult the owner before providing top loading tactical refueler fill stands. Alright, 2310, truck offloading and loading facility. The design certification for the truck offloading facility must comply with the National Fire Protection Association 30, 30A, and Title 40, CFR Part 112. Also, do not locate the truck offload with the tactical refueler loading facilities closer than 25 feet from above the ground tanks of the building, roads, overhead power lines, pad-mounted transformer to property line with exemption of the overhead power lines. These minimum separation distances may be permitted to be reduced to 15 feet with a Class 2 and Class 3 liquid. Storage tanks for ground-protected fueling facilities. Ungrounded horizontal tanks are preferred for federal, state, local, underground and horizontal fueling. Underground horizontal tanks are preferred. Federal, state, local regulation determining either the above ground storage tank, underground storage tank. 25 piping system, 251 piping system, tactical refueler facilities for systems serving with the tactical refueler fill stands, the appropriate filling references. 252 above ground piping system filling station follow state and local regulations. See these requirements when they do not extend them, provided they describe the following example. The piping 4 inches and larger shall be butt welded, socket welded, U the flange connection for the joint piping, and the equipment of piping smaller than 4 inches may be butt welded, socket welded, U the flange connection, socket welded connection, union joint pipe to equipment that threaded name of the connection with maybe even the butt weld and socket weld connection cannot be physically provided. Branch outlet fittings do not have the design to be radiograph. 226 equipment description. 261 filling station. 2611 fuel dispensaries used commercial available to dispenser with a self-contained electrical motor pumping unit with a remote pumping type with a pump and the motor located with a storage tank with if any attack with the pump if it's used to ensure this is adequate to reduce the start of volume as the leak check. Provide a meter for each dispenser. For the dispenser flow rates are typically maximum with 10 gallons per minute with the flow state with local regulation actual maximum designer shall check with the state of the local regulation limitations. Dispenser flow rate dispensing system will include with the management controlling system printer, computer microprocessor, equipped with a fuel dispenser inline filterization capable of sediment removal of 10 milligram liter or less emergency breakaway hose connections to each fuel dispenser in accordance with the National Fire Protection Association 30A. Liquids supplied with the dispenser under pressure for the provided emergency shut-off valve with incorporating fusible link and supply line base at each dispenser required in National Fire Protection Association 30A. Equipable, dispensable islands and personal spill contaminant pans under the dispensers. 2612 card and key locks. Insert permissible possible economical operational advantages to the electronic key and electronic card and key system with the permits of 24-hour unmanned operation facility. These systems combined with the card and key reader located near the surface pump. The reader is activated with a card and a key, accumulates the issued customer data with the downloaded central computer on the periodic basis. 262 refueler truck loading facility. Each equipment equipped with a similar with the truck loading facility with the example to provide with a ground reel loop of the high level shut-off ground detection system. Verify the type of the nozzle required by the user. 263 valves. For system serving the refuelers, filler stand with the requirements of the tank of the truck loading facility. The below requirements apply to the filling station only. 263 1. Materials of construction requires the valve to be carbon steel body with the bonnets, so they do not allow the valves to be aluminum, cast iron, or bronze in materials using only API fire-safe valves. Alright, isolation valve types. Ball valve, they are only proposed with a quick opening, frequent opening isolation valve of all type, lockable valve with design with a synthetic sealing material to burn out and fire metal to metal seat. Remain to affect the closure, comply with the API standard 607 the Teflon Viton synthetic sealing The seating material valve shall be compliant with the API standard 608. Double block and bleed isolation valve do not provide unless directed by the owner. Lubricated plug valve. Lubricated plug valves are not allowed. Gate valves. Gate valves are not allowed. Butterfly valves are not allowed. Isolation valve operators, that's 2633, isolation valve operators. Manually operated valve is not specified with the remote automatic emergency operation of the geared operators for ball valves larger than 6 inches. Provide locking tab of the isolation valve with allow the padlock to be used to lock out with the valve during maintenance. Provide chain operators on the valve located with 72 inches high above the grave with a 2634 isolation valve location. Provide isolation piping to the control flow with a permanent isolation. Equip with the maintenance of the repair is necessary to conduct a valid hydrostatic test. Minimum requirement provided the isolation valve with the following location. When piping goes underground, comes above ground, or comes aground where required pressure testing, all subsurface approved with the piping connection for the storage tank on suction side, discharge side, each of the pumping unit except the suction side or vertical centrifugal pumps installed with underground tanks. On the outlet connection with each line strainer meter of the diaphragm control valve with the other equipment required with the periodic servicing and one inlet valve one outlet valve may be used to isolate more than one piece of adjacent equipment with are connected to the series. Diaphragm control valve. These valves are not required in filling station. Other valves, check valves. Use check valve to prevent backflow with the pump of the branch of the line meter for the location run back reverse flow must be avoided. Valves might be swing disc, globe, dual plate, hinge disc, spring loaded, pop of the ball with the diaphragm actuated type with the check valve with the soft sleeve with the non-slamming type of the renewable sleeve of the disc. Ensure check valves conform with the API spec 6D. 2652 thermal relief. Provide thermal relief valve with a round isolation check valve to receive the extra pressure caused by the thermal expansion of the liquid trap between shut-off points. See figure 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 27 the vapor recover. The provided vapor recovery according with the guide specification with the more stringent federal, state, local code regulations. Some requirements are the Title 40 CFR Part 60, Subpart 20. If the gasoline is being handled, provide with a minimum stage 1 recovery vapor recover then pipe at stage 2 and the piping in stage 2. If the stage 2 does not require local state regulation, time and installation cap of the vapor return pipe at the dispenser. This shows your integral valve, the thermal relief valve. Double block and bleed valve, the thermal body relief, manual body drain, product flow from tanks to system, welded neck flange, thermal pipe relief differential pressure relief towards upstream, manual drain pump recovery system other than approved collection method and thermal discharge. Or your conventional thermal relief valve piping system. The Union thermal discharge type valve, threaded units, welded neck, flange, isolation valve, strainer, insulating flange, end fuel restraint, secondary containment piping from tanks, curb equipment slab, piping support for small lines to the system, product flow, pressure gauge, thermal relief valve, and Union. Conventional thermal relief valve piping system that was. Alright, this shows your equipment pump housing or pads. If your check valve, typical detonator control valve from tank trucks offloading to refueler loading to fuel storage tanks, integral valve thermal piping system, fuel storage tanks from two fuel storage tanks from incoming pipeline control valve. Equipment pump house and pads. Alright, this one is your tanker truck refueler equipment racks. Check valve, typical pump house, two pump house, ball valve, typical conventional thermal relief piping system, control valve, integral thermal relief valve, filter, separator, typical plug valve from the pump house. Alright, this shows your storage tanks, conventional thermal piping system, tank with a fuel line, integral valve thermal piping system, typical plug valve, storage tank thermal relief piping system. Alright, this shows a canopy, dual product, dual hose dispenser, dual product, quad hose dispenser, concrete and equipment pads, asphalt pavement, and then it circles around and it goes dual product, dual hose dispenser, dual product, quad hose dispenser, one-way traffic flow, asphalt pavement, and that's your vehicle motor fuel filling station plan. Canopy loading equipment itself with asphalt pavement, one fuel way traffic flow, concrete truck and equipment pads, containment area, asphalt pavement, concrete remote spill contamination system, refueler grounding product truck loading facility plan. Alright, your loading system with hose shows the ground reel, dead man control, grounding verification, overfill protection equipment, loading hose with a hose nozzle, hose reel, loading hose reel to be self-restricting electronic motor-driven retractor, meter, flow separator, strainer, control valve, card reader, optional, double bleed block, isolation valve, fusible link, safety valve, not required in Air Force projects, surface suppressor if required. Loading system of hose shows the load hosing loading nozzle converted with a hose storage, ground reel, ground verification, overfill, dead man control, meter, flow strainer, control valve, card operational surge suppressor, double block and bleed isolation valve, fusible link to the valve not required by the Air Force projects, and then your exam, and this was exactly a reading of your introduction to petroleum fuel facility, pipelines and grounding fuel facilities, taking out of UFC's testing.